Before you dismiss today as just another date on the calendar, I want you to pause for a moment, because there is an astrological event unfolding on July 10th that carries far more emotional weight than most people will recognize. Many will move through this day without realizing that the energy surrounding them has quietly shifted. But if you belong to one of the 3 Zodiac signs we will explore later, I truly hope you stay present for what is about to unfold, because this alignment has the potential to touch a place inside you that has been waiting for relief for a very long time. Today marks an exact trine between Venus and Chiron. And after spending considerable time examining this chart from every possible angle, I have become convinced that this is one of the most meaningful healing transits we have experienced in years. Not decades, but certainly years. I do not make that statement lightly. The longer I studied the planetary geometry, the more impossible it became to treat this as another ordinary transit, passing quietly in the background. Every layer of symbolism pointed toward the same conclusion. This is not insignificant cosmic scenery. This is a defining emotional doorway. If recent months have left you carrying invisible burdens connected to love, self-respect, financial security, or your ability to believe in your own value, then there is a strong possibility that today begins to loosen the grip those burdens have held over your heart. Do not expect fireworks. Do not expect your entire life to transform in a single dramatic moment. The healing available today is much quieter than that, and because it is quiet, many people will overlook it. Instead, imagine waking up and realizing that the heaviness you have grown accustomed to somehow feels lighter. Imagine noticing that your breathing comes easier, that your thoughts feel less tangled, that your heart no longer feels trapped inside the same emotional cage. Sometimes the greatest turning points arrive without announcing themselves, and that is exactly why this moment deserves your attention. Yet there is an even deeper reason this particular healing reaches beneath the surface, and it is connected to a karmic process that has been unfolding for the past 18 months. Later in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how that cycle has been influencing everything you have experienced recently, because once you see the larger picture, many of the struggles, delays, disappointments, and emotional lessons that seemed random will suddenly begin to fit together with remarkable clarity. Before we arrive there, however, we need to understand why this transit stands apart from every other major planetary movement we have witnessed this year. The answer is not simply that Venus forms a trine. Harmonious aspects occur regularly throughout astrology. Planets create supportive angles over and over again. On their own, trines are not unusual. What makes July 10th extraordinary is the larger story surrounding this exact alignment. Timing matters. Context matters. The planets involved matter. Every piece of the puzzle arrives at precisely the same moment, and together they create something much more powerful than any single aspect could accomplish by itself. Let us begin with Venus, the planet associated with love, relationships, beauty, personal values, financial resources, and the way we receive affection and abundance, entered Virgo on July 9th, which is today as this video reaches you. Then, less than 13 hours after crossing into Virgo, Venus forms an exact 120-degree trine with Chiron, which entered Taurus last month for the first time since 1984. That timing alone deserves attention because both planetary movements are fresh, active, and filled with momentum. If Chiron is unfamiliar to you, think of it as the symbolic place within your birth chart that holds the deepest emotional wound you continue carrying throughout life. It represents the vulnerability that remains sensitive no matter how much growth, experience, or healing work you have already completed. Yet Chiron contains a remarkable contradiction. The very place where you have suffered the most often becomes the place where you eventually develop extraordinary wisdom, compassion, and the ability to guide others through similar pain. Your deepest injury gradually transforms into your greatest source of understanding. That paradox is the essence of Chiron, At this moment, Chiron sits at the earliest degrees of Taurus, a sign deeply connected with the physical world, the body, material stability, personal value, security, and your beliefs about what you truly deserve. Because of that placement, the collective wound currently being illuminated revolves around self-worth. It asks whether you genuinely believe you are enough without proving yourself. It questions whether you think love must be earned, whether stability requires endless performance, whether comfort is something you deserve naturally, or only after exhausting yourself trying to become worthy of it. These are not abstract questions. They live quietly inside countless people every single day. They shape relationships, careers, financial choices, and even the way individuals speak to themselves in moments when nobody else is listening. If any part of that feels painfully familiar, then you are already touching the heart of this transit. Now picture Venus, the planet governing love, value, connection, and receiving, extending a perfect trine toward that wounded place. Rather than forcing painful confrontation, this aspect offers something much gentler. It creates an opening where healing becomes possible. Nothing is demanded from you, nothing is ripped away. Instead, the opportunity simply appears, almost like discovering a door that has always existed but remained invisible until now. Whether you choose to walk through it is another story, but the doorway itself quietly swings open today. Still, there is another layer hidden beneath everything we have discussed so far, and this is the realization that completely changed how I interpreted this transit. Earlier, I mentioned that something karmic has been building beneath the surface for the last 18 months. This is where that story begins. The lunar nodes, mathematical points associated with karmic history and the evolutionary direction of the soul, are currently positioned along the Pisces-Virgo axis. They have occupied this axis since January of last year, and that chapter is almost complete. On July 26th, they move away from Virgo entirely, leaving behind an energetic cycle that has defined the past 18 months. That means we are living through the closing chapter of a karmic process rather than its beginning. Throughout this entire period, the South Node, representing what the soul is ready to release, including outdated habits, inherited emotional burdens, ancestral conditioning, and repetitive patterns that no longer support growth, has remained in Virgo. As I reflected on that reality while studying today's chart, one realization stopped me completely because it revealed why this Venus and Chiron trine feels so much deeper than an ordinary moment of emotional relief. And understanding that connection changes the way you see everything that has happened leading up to today. What happens on July 11th is the piece that completes everything we have been building toward. And once you recognize how these events connect, it becomes almost impossible to view this period as a series of unrelated transits. Only a few hours after the exact trine between Venus and Chiron, Venus reaches an exact conjunction with the South Node. She moves directly onto that karmic point without any distance separating them, and that detail changes the entire emotional meaning of this sequence. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the healing that begins on July 10th is not limited to a single day or a temporary emotional lift. It represents the closing movement of an 18-month karmic cycle that has been unfolding quietly beneath the surface of your life. Every recurring relationship dynamic that kept repeating itself, every moment you questioned your own value, every situation where you emptied yourself, trying to keep someone else comfortable, every time you continued giving long after your own emotional reserves had disappeared, every season when you remained in places that no longer honored your spirit, every experience where you loved beyond healthy limits or accepted less than your heart deserved because you secretly believed nothing better was available to you. All of those stories are reaching the point where they can no longer continue in the same form. This conjunction signals that the cycle has reached its natural conclusion. It does not feel like an invitation to casually reconsider old habits. it feels much more final than that. The South Node is not known for negotiating. Its purpose is release. It removes what has already completed its purpose, whether the mind feels prepared or not. The patterns it strips away are often the very ones we have clung to because they once helped us survive, even though they eventually became the source of our suffering. Some of those patterns may have followed you for years. Others may feel as though they have shaped your entire life. If your spiritual beliefs include the idea of karma extending beyond this lifetime, then this transit may even feel older than your present story can explain. That is why so many people have recently experienced emotional fatigue without understanding its source. Perhaps memories you believed were finished suddenly returned. Perhaps people from your past unexpectedly crossed your path again. Perhaps emotions you thought had already been processed resurfaced with surprising intensity. Maybe there has been an unshakable feeling that something important is ending, even though you could not find the words to describe exactly what was slipping away. If any of that sounds familiar, understand that it does not necessarily mean you are unraveling. It may simply mean you are completing a chapter that your soul has been preparing to close for a very long time. The difference now is that the completion is no longer happening beneath your awareness. It becomes something you can finally recognize, something you can consciously acknowledge instead of unconsciously carrying. Although every sign can receive something meaningful from this alignment, there are 3 zodiac signs that stand in a uniquely powerful position to experience its effects. For these signs, the breakthrough reaches into deeply personal territory because of the houses being activated within their natal charts. Let us begin with Taurus, because if you have your sun, moon, rising, or several important placements there, this message speaks directly to your current journey. What is unfolding for you is intensely personal, because Chiron is traveling through your first house, the area connected with identity, physical presence, your body, your sense of self, and the way you exist in the world. When Chiron occupies this part of the chart, the wound being illuminated is not about external circumstances alone. It reaches into the deepest question a person can ask themselves. Am I enough exactly as I am? To understand why this moment matters so much, it helps to remember what you have already lived through. During the past 7 years, Uranus traveled through Taurus, and if you carry strong Taurus energy, you likely remember how relentless that experience felt. Stability rarely remained stable. Parts of your identity that once seemed permanent were repeatedly challenged. Familiar routines changed. Foundations you depended upon shifted unexpectedly. Security often felt uncertain, and life demanded flexibility, even when every instinct wanted consistency. Although Uranus ultimately encouraged freedom and growth, the process required constant adjustment, and that kind of continuous change leaves a person emotionally worn down. It is like rebuilding the structure of an entire house while still being expected to live inside it every single day without ever receiving permission to rest. Now the atmosphere changes. Chiron does not arrive to create another revolution. Chiron arrives to restore what those years of upheaval left tender and unfinished. Instead of asking you to keep running toward the next transformation, this transit gently encourages you to remain present with yourself long enough to care for the places that never had an opportunity to recover. As Venus forms today's harmonious trine from your 5th house, the house associated with romance, creativity, joy, pleasure, and the inner child, that loving current flows directly toward the vulnerable place Chiron occupies within your 1st house. Symbolically, the energy of love reaches the place where your identity has carried its deepest uncertainty. In everyday life, this may reveal something that has quietly shaped your decisions for much longer than you realized. Perhaps you have lived with the belief that your worth depends on what you contribute. Maybe you unconsciously assumed that people would only remain close if you stayed dependable, productive, emotionally available, endlessly patient, or strong enough to hold everyone else together. Somewhere inside, there may have been a lingering fear that the moment you stopped performing those roles and simply allowed yourself to exist without proving your value, you would no longer feel lovable. You might worry that your authentic self is somehow too much for others, or perhaps not enough to deserve lasting affection. This is a story many Taurus placements have carried for years, and its emotional weight often remains hidden beneath remarkable strength and reliability. Yet strength can become exhausting when it is constantly mistaken for identity. What makes this transit remarkable is not that it forces this belief to disappear overnight, but that it creates the quiet realization that the belief no longer deserves authority over your life. Rather than arriving through a dramatic event, the shift may feel surprisingly ordinary. You may notice it during a peaceful conversation, while completing an everyday task, or in a simple moment when your heart suddenly understands something your mind has struggled to believe. You may recognize that your existence never required constant justification. Your value was never dependent upon endless productivity. Love, comfort, rest, beauty, and simple happiness do not have to be purchased through sacrifice. They belong to you because you exist. For many Taurus placements, this realization may not remain only intellectual. It may become physical. Your breathing may deepen. The tightness you have carried across your chest, shoulders, or body may begin to soften as though years of silent pressure are finally leaving your nervous system. This is the kind of embodied healing Chiron often brings when supported by Venus, because the energy originates from your fifth house. The pathways toward that healing are likely to involve love, creative expression, joyful experiences, or reconnecting with the innocent part of yourself that existed before life convinced you that worth had to be earned. Some of you may experience this through a romantic partner who reflects genuine acceptance back to you without requiring performance, without expecting perfection, and without asking you to become someone different first. In that simple experience of being loved exactly as you are, something much older than the relationship itself may finally begin to heal, and that realization prepares the ground for what comes next. For some of you, the breakthrough may arrive through an entirely different doorway. A creative project that has felt frozen for months may suddenly begin moving again, as though an invisible barrier has quietly disappeared. Inspiration returns without force. Ideas begin flowing where frustration once lived. Whether this healing appears through love, artistic expression, or a simple shift inside your emotional landscape, the important truth remains unchanged. The opening is genuine. The transformation belongs to you. And this moment has the potential to become one you remember long after the day itself has passed. Now let us turn our attention to Virgo, because if you have strong Virgo placements, I truly hope you remain present for every part of what comes next. Few transits speak so directly to your personal identity as this one does. Venus is now traveling through your own sign, and the South Node stands beside her, creating an alignment that points directly toward the deepest layers of who you have believed yourself to be. This is not primarily about relationships, career, or outside circumstances. This is about your relationship with yourself. I believe many Virgo placements have spent much of their lives chasing a standard that was impossible from the very beginning. This is not the healthy desire to improve yourself or to pursue excellence. It is something much heavier than that. It is the relentless internal pressure that quietly whispers, "You will only deserve love if you never make mistakes." It convinces you that your value depends upon constant usefulness, endless responsibility, flawless execution, and the ability to solve every problem before anyone else even notices it exists. Deep inside, many Virgo souls have unconsciously learned that being needed feels safer than simply being loved. That belief shapes countless decisions without ever announcing itself. It appears in the way you instinctively take responsibility for situations that were never yours to carry. It reveals itself every time someone around you begins struggling, and you immediately shift into the role of helper, fixer, organizer, or rescuer, before considering your own needs. It shows up when you replay conversations over and over after they have ended, searching every sentence for evidence that you somehow failed, disappointed someone, or should have handled things differently. Even when everything appears perfectly fine on the outside, your mind continues looking for invisible imperfections that no one else can see. Living beneath that kind of constant self-examination is emotionally exhausting, yet it often becomes so familiar that you mistake it for normal life. Beneath all of those behaviors lives a single painful belief: love must be earned. Acceptance depends upon performance. If you stop serving, correcting, improving, anticipating, or sacrificing, then perhaps you will stop deserving connection altogether. That story quietly leads many Virgo placements into relationships where they continue pouring energy into others while slowly forgetting how to receive care themselves. They give until emotional depletion feels ordinary, then wonder why the love they worked so hard to deserve still leaves them feeling empty. Today's alignment begins interrupting that cycle. Chiron currently occupies your 9th house, the area connected with higher understanding, personal philosophy, wisdom, expanded awareness, and the beliefs through which you interpret your entire life. As Venus forms this harmonious trine from your 1st house, something remarkable becomes possible. Instead of seeing your patterns only through analysis, you begin experiencing them from an entirely different level of awareness. You have probably understood these tendencies intellectually for quite some time. You may have read about them, talked about them, or recognized them in yourself before. But understanding something with the mind and feeling its truth within your heart are completely different experiences. This transit creates the possibility that the realization finally reaches your emotional reality. You begin recognizing that your value never depended upon endless usefulness. Perfection was never the entrance fee for receiving genuine love. The parts of yourself you spent years criticizing, hiding, correcting, or apologizing for do not make you less deserving of affection. They simply remind you that you are human, and humanity has always been enough. At the same time, the South Node resting upon your ascendant begins dissolving the identity you have carried for far too long. It gently removes the carefully maintained image of always having everything under control. It strips away the exhausting expectation that you must always appear capable, composed, independent, and emotionally self-sufficient. The role of being the person who never needs support gradually loses its grip. Beneath that performance is someone far more authentic, someone who no longer has to hide exhaustion behind competence or loneliness behind productivity. I sincerely believe that the version of yourself waiting underneath those layers possesses a quiet magnetism that no carefully managed image could ever create. Authenticity carries a warmth that perfection never will. This transit encourages you to step back from constantly managing everyone else's lives. It offers permission to release the impossible responsibility of fixing every problem before it reaches another person. For perhaps the first time in a long while, you are invited to experience what it feels like to allow someone else to support you instead. I understand that possibility may feel deeply uncomfortable because receiving can seem far more vulnerable than giving. Yet the graceful flow of this trine suggests that support does not have to come with guilt. Safety does not have to be earned. You can allow yourself to be cared for without feeling as though you owe something in return. After everything you have carried, perhaps this gentle reminder arrives at exactly the right moment. Now let us speak about Capricorn, because your story under this transit unfolds in a way that feels especially significant. Of all the signs touched by this healing current, I believe Capricorn may have resisted this particular kind of emotional opening more than almost anyone else. Not because you reject healing itself, but because somewhere along the way you convinced yourself that allowing softness might cost you everything you worked so hard to build. If you have strong Capricorn placements, Much of your life has likely been organized around discipline, responsibility, consistency, and carefully maintained control. Those qualities have carried you through challenges that would have overwhelmed many others. They helped you accomplish goals, survive uncertainty, and become someone others naturally depend upon. Yet every strength carries its own shadow. Over time, many Capricorn placements quietly begin associating emotional vulnerability with danger. Unstructured happiness starts feeling irresponsible. Spontaneous joy seems almost suspicious. There can be an unconscious belief that relaxing your defenses, even briefly, might allow everything you have built to fall apart. This becomes one expression of the Capricorn wound surrounding love. It often grows from deeply rooted beliefs, sometimes inherited across generations, that success and intimacy cannot comfortably exist together. One path leads toward achievement, while the other leads toward emotional closeness. And somewhere inside, you may have accepted the false idea that choosing one requires sacrificing the other. There may also be a fear that revealing your complete emotional reality would somehow weaken the authority, competence, or stability people associate with you. As a result, others often know the dependable version of you, while the more vulnerable parts remain carefully protected behind invisible walls. Chiron now travels through your fifth house, the realm connected with romance, creativity, pleasure, children, and the inner child. From this position, Chiron quietly directs your attention toward every place where responsibility gradually replaced delight. It gently illuminates each moment you postponed happiness, because there was always another obligation, waiting, another goal, demanding attention, another reason to believe joy could wait until later. Rather than criticizing those choices, this transit compassionately asks whether postponing your heart has truly protected you, or whether it has simply delayed the very fulfillment you have been working so hard to create. And that question becomes the doorway leading into the next part of this journey. Every time you told yourself that happiness could wait, every promise that began with, "After I finish this, after I reach that goal, after life becomes more stable," you were unknowingly postponing a part of yourself that has been asking for attention all along. Chiron is no longer encouraging delay. Its message now is much simpler. The future you kept waiting for has arrived. Today, Venus travels through your ninth house, the realm connected with higher understanding, expansion, wisdom, and the way your perspective grows through experience. From there, Venus sends a harmonious trine toward Chiron in your fifth house, creating an energetic bridge between insight and emotional healing. What I believe this offers is not merely another realization that sounds inspiring for a few hours. It creates the possibility of a deep internal shift, one that settles into your body instead of remaining trapped inside your thoughts. You begin recognizing with complete certainty that joy does not compete with your ambitions. Love does not weaken discipline. Creativity does not distract you from success. They are the very forces that sustain everything meaningful you hope to build. This is not about abandoning responsibility. It is about discovering that responsibility becomes stronger when it is supported by genuine emotional nourishment instead of constant deprivation. There is another layer within this alignment that deserves attention, because it explains why this moment feels so significant. The South Node is also active within your ninth house, indicating that an entire system of beliefs is reaching its expiration point. Perhaps these ideas were inherited from your family. Perhaps they came from cultural expectations, childhood experiences, or long-standing definitions of success, commitment, strength, or emotional expression. Whatever their source, they once served an important purpose. They helped you navigate an earlier chapter of life. Yet the version of yourself standing here today has outgrown them. Releasing those outdated philosophies allows something far more authentic to emerge. As rigid certainty begins to soften, love gains room to breathe. Relationships become less about meeting impossible standards and more about genuine connection. The trine itself does not demand dramatic transformation. It does not insist that every protective wall disappear immediately. Instead, it quietly reminds you that lowering those defenses, even slightly, does not place you in danger. You can feel uncertain while remaining secure. You can reveal your heart without sacrificing your strength. You can welcome spontaneity without losing respect. You can experience happiness without first creating a detailed plan to justify it. Once that truth moves beyond theory and becomes lived experience, everything that follows begins unfolding from a different emotional foundation. This is also why I believe today's alignment deserves far more attention than a typical uplifting transit. Many harmonious aspects pass through the sky each year, bringing temporary encouragement before everyday habits quietly reclaim their place. Trines naturally create ease, and sometimes that very ease allows people to enjoy the moment without making lasting changes. They feel lighter for a day, then unconsciously return to the same emotional patterns they thought they had left behind. What makes this sequence different is the simultaneous involvement of the South Node. While the trine offers healing, the South Node removes the outdated structure that made the wound possible in the first place. Imagine one influence opening the door to something healthier, while the other carefully clears away everything blocking that doorway. Together, they create something far more enduring than comfort alone could accomplish. You are not simply receiving a moment of emotional relief. You are also releasing the unconscious agreements that have quietly shaped your choices for years. The belief that you are somehow not enough. The belief that love must involve pain. The belief that security only arrives after prolonged struggle or sacrifice. Those invisible contracts begin losing their authority. That combination of graceful healing and karmic release is precisely why this transit carries the potential for lasting change instead of temporary emotional comfort. The timing makes it even more meaningful because we now stand within the final 2 weeks of this entire nodal cycle. The process that began in January of 2025 is approaching its conclusion. Think of this period as the closing chapter rather than the opening scene. Everything your soul has been working through during these many months is gathering into one final opportunity for completion. That does not necessarily mean the experience will feel effortless. Genuine healing rarely follows a perfectly comfortable path. Some people may suddenly find old memories returning with surprising clarity. Others may notice emotions they believed had already been resolved, asking for attention once again. A past relationship may briefly occupy your thoughts. Financial fears you assumed were gone may unexpectedly resurface. None of these experiences automatically signal that you are moving backward. In many cases, they indicate the opposite. The South Node often brings unfinished emotional material into conscious awareness one final time, so it can finally be acknowledged and released instead of quietly remaining beneath the surface. Looking ahead only reinforces this interpretation. On July 13th, merely 3 days after today's exact trine, Venus forms a square with Uranus, while also creating a quincunx to Neptune and another quincunx to Pluto, all within roughly 6 hours. Those rapid shifts introduce unpredictability, emotional uncertainty, changing relationship dynamics, unexpected disruptions, and situations that challenge your stability. The healing received today is not meant to remain theoretical. It will quickly encounter real-world circumstances, asking whether it has genuinely become part of you. When life becomes unpredictable, can you continue responding from your new understanding instead of automatically returning to familiar fears? Can you remain rooted in your renewed sense of worth even when external events feel uncertain? I believe that possibility exists precisely because of what today's alignment establishes. The trine offers the emotional foundation. The South Node removes outdated patterns that no longer belong in your future. Then, when later transits introduce challenges, You are no longer standing upon the fragile emotional ground that once defined your reactions. Instead, you respond from something steadier, something tested through experience, something genuine. Perhaps that is my favorite quality of this entire transit. Its power is quiet. It does not seek attention. It does not announce itself through dramatic spectacle or overwhelming emotional displays. This is Earth energy expressed through Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Earth signs value what proves itself through consistency. They trust what becomes solid over time. Their breakthroughs often arrive without applause, because lasting transformation rarely needs an audience. The most meaningful moment today may appear almost ordinary from the outside. It may happen while preparing your morning coffee. It may appear during a peaceful drive or within a conversation where the words leaving your mouth surprise even you because they come from a place you have never fully trusted before. It may be the first time in years that your reflection meets your eyes without immediately inviting criticism. Nothing about that moment needs to appear dramatic to become life-changing. Quiet does not mean insignificant. In fact, the deepest shifts often happen without anyone else recognizing them. Once your body finally accepts what your mind has struggled to believe, that your worth has always existed independently of achievement, suffering, perfection, service, or endless sacrifice, every relationship begins changing. Every professional decision changes. Every boundary changes. Every act of self-respect becomes easier because it no longer depends upon external permission. That is the true invitation carried by July 10th, 2026. It does not promise instant miracles or effortless solutions. Instead, it offers something far more sustainable, a grounded transformation in the way you experience yourself, love, security, and your place within your own life. Personally, I believe that kind of change is far more valuable than any dramatic miracle could ever be. If you have stayed with me until this point, thank you for sharing this time with me. If this message spoke to something meaningful inside you, and you would like to continue exploring astrology through this perspective, I would truly appreciate your support by subscribing to the channel. I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your zodiac sign and share what themes have been unfolding in your life recently. I am genuinely curious whether you have already begun noticing the energy surrounding this transit, because I read every comment, and I have a feeling many of us are moving through this remarkable chapter together. Be kind to yourself, take good care of your heart, and I look forward to sharing the next journey with you.